Can God change his mind or will? Those are two questions. Can God change his mind or will? Actually, it's three questions, because scholars have studied the Bible and they've determined that God actually has two kinds of will. He's got one kind of will that says, I'm going to let some things happen. And he's got another kind of will that says, I am going to make sure my end purposes take place, even though some small things happen. So, for example, God doesn't necessarily intend, or God doesn't necessarily cause a particular evil act in the world, but he has a bigger purpose with it, and he can take that and turn it into the bigger purpose. Okay, so that's that two aspects of God's will. But does God ever change what he's doing? Well, if you read the Old Testament, we get passages like this, where God says to Abraham, Abraham, kill your son. And then Abraham goes, and he's ready to kill his son. And as he's raising the knife, God says, hold on there. We're not going to do that. I provided a substitute. And some people would say, okay, that's God changing his mind. No, God never says, I want Isaac dead. Right? But he wants Abraham to kill him. In a sense, Abraham killed his son in the sense of relationship when he raised the knife. Abraham said, okay, at this moment now, I am ready to release my son from my hold into God's hands. And in a sense, that was a death of relationship. And so, from that perspective, Abraham accomplished what God wanted him to do. And then he provides a ram as an illustration of the sacrifice that Jesus will be for us later, a substitute. So that's a big example, but the bottom line is, I would say, no, God doesn't change his mind, but he reveals it to us in incremental ways. That's the easiest way for us to understand it. Sometimes he reveals to us what we need to know at that moment in order for us to be the people he wants us to be. And then maybe a little while later, he'll reveal to us a little bit more. One last example on that. In the Old Testament, it says eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Jesus says, you've heard that statement, right? I now say to you, if someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him your other cheek. We're going to eliminate that whole eye for eye, tooth for tooth thing. Did God change his mind? No. What he's doing is he's now revealing to us a new way to live, that it's not based on law, but is based on a love for God and humility before him. It's like another layer, another level of this education process God is doing with humanity. Okay? So God doesn't actually change his mind, although to us sometimes it looks like it will. But one last thing I should say about that. Why should we pray? If God never changes his mind, why should we pray? It goes back to the same thing. I don't know what God's mind is. Therefore, why should I pretend to assume that I know what his mind is? His mind might be, his will might be for me to learn something through the process of prayer. And so I'm going to go ahead and do it, because that's what the Bible tells me I need to be doing. I need to be a person of prayer. And in that process, if I'm obedient, God will reveal himself to me as much as he might actually change circumstances.